Hello, and welcome to CMX's In the Loop podcast. In the Loop is our opportunity to spend time with industry colleagues and friends to talk about their businesses, industry trends, and the use of technology to stay ahead of operational challenges. I'm your host, Jim Hardiman, Chief Marketing Officer here at CMX, and in this episode, we spend time with Dr. Darin Detwiler. Dr. Detwiler is one of the leading advocates in the US and abroad for improving food safety. He didn't start off his career, though, with a focus on food safety. But through a heart-wrenching and tragic event with his son, he changed course and has worked tirelessly for the last 30 years to bring about change in how governments and companies approach food safety. I really enjoyed our conversation and hearing Darin's story, and I think you will too, so thanks for checking us out.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our podcast. We're really excited about today's episode and certainly really excited about today's guest. You might notice that we've kind of mixing some things up. We've asked Jeremy Horn, our SVP of Marketing, to join me today, and so really excited to spend some time with our guest, Dr. Darin Detwiler. So Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to do the honors and get us kicked off here. If you wouldn't mind kind of introducing Darin and going through kind of his background, we'll jump right into our conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So Darin, very excited to have you here today. We've been looking forward to this for a long time. Quick introduction here. Well, fairly quick anyway. So Darin is the Associate Professor at Northeastern University's College of Professional Studies, where he teaches global corporate social responsibility, global economics of food and agriculture, and food policy courses for graduate students who work in the food industry. He also advises industry and government agencies addressing food safety and authenticity issues in the US and abroad. He's an author. He literally wrote the book on food safety, which is Food Safety Past, Present, and Predictions. We'll include a link to that in the podcast show notes at the end. He's a keynote speaker. He's spoken on TEDx as a speaker as well. He's a columnist for the Quality Assurance magazine. Also the recipient of several awards. So the International Association for Food Protection in 2018, Distinguished Service Award, and 2022, the UNCD Todd Control of Foodborne Illness Award. He's regarded as one of America's leading food safety advocates by Food Safety magazine. And Darin, you're on a mission to lead, educate, advocate, and inspire food safety's Herculean efforts, which sounds great. We're going to dig into that. But you're also a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine veteran.
That is a mouthful, and Jeremy, thanks for doing that. Darin, I have to joke, I have to kid a little bit. When Jeremy and I were reviewing your background and all your accomplishments, we both joked that maybe neither of us were smart enough to talk with you, so hence you're getting both of us today. So really appreciate you being here. Like Jeremy said, we're very excited to speak with you and really have you give a chance to just hear the audience to hear your story and background. So, let's just jump right into the conversation. Darin, let's talk about your mission, why that's important to you, and certainly we have to know, how do you go from a nuclear submarine to being one of the leading advocates for food safety today, worldwide?
Well, it's easy to have a plan, but it's even easier to be a couple decades into your quote-unquote adult life and realize some of those signs along the road that pointed you in the direction you went. I can remember back with the 3 Mile Island, the nuclear incident, and even though I was on the opposite coast, this idea of failure and technology and science and this invisible threat. Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. Again, the idea of even as great as we are, literally, putting man in space, putting man, a team, including the first woman, the first teacher. She was a woman, but the first teacher in space. But we can have failures. While I was on submarine in the Navy. I operated a nuclear reactor. I went through the Navy's nuclear propulsion program, and during the Cold War, I served on a submarine, and people have these images of submarines based on television and media and maybe Disneyland. There were no windows, and we'd go out to sea for a good amount of time, and there were even times where we would leave the pier, and a week or two later, we'd come back to the same exact place on the same exact pier, and you're kind of left with this idea of, did we actually leave? Did we actually do anything? And we were following, quote unquote, the enemy, the people we were supposed to be watching and protecting against, but we never saw them. They were always like a bleep on a radar screen or an echo kind of a thing. And so there's a lot of this idea of the invisible dangers and this idea of the bigger picture, the greater good. And I was at a point, in my term in the service where I would just be transitioning from active duty. I had served 2 terms on the submarine to the Naval Reserves, where I was going to be teaching others. And there was this threat. There's this new word, and we've seen these over the years. Oh, there's this new threat, whether it is Ebola or coronavirus, at some point here, right? But you play this kind of, well, that's over there. That's not going to impact me. We'll do this. We'll avoid that. And very short version of the story, to just be fresh out of wearing a uniform and getting back into a more civilian workforce, going to pick up my 16-month-old son at the daycare center because I was going to work and his mother was going to work. There's a note on the door from the health department that there was another child who had shown symptoms and been tested positive for E. coli. This was quite a shock because the previous news we had heard was that it was about an hour and a half south in Seattle from where we were. So a lot, and I was always worried at that time about my 9-year-old, because my 16-month-old, he never ate a hamburger, he never ate it at Jack in the Box, right? How can this happen? We saw symptoms in our own child. We took him to be tested. At that time, it took 48 hours for test results to come back, but he continued to get worse to the point where he was hospitalized. Then he was airlifted to Seattle, to the Children's Hospital down there. The next day, he was in intensive care. The next day, he was in a surgery for exploratory surgery to see, what was the extent of the damage that he was dealing with, and he came out of that in a medically induced coma because most of his intestines had been destroyed, and you're at this point where you're thinking, well, we're going to get better, but within less than 4 weeks. From noticing this notice on the door to symptoms to hospitalizations to surgery to a coma, he just continued to get worse and worse and worse. And again, this sense of, this is something I can't see. This is something I can't even explain. I'm barely able to explain to myself, let alone explain it to, imagining myself explaining it to him later when he recovers. I have certain memories that I can never get rid of. Holding him while sitting on a hospital bed, and he had no he had no renal function, so they weren't going to give him a bottle, which for him was a comfort. But he looked at the IV bag hanging on a pole, and he was calling for that as his bottle. He didn't understand. I remember seeing him being put onto a gurney to be taken to the helicopter to be lifted. I remember seeing his little blonde hair boy body at 16 months of age literally dwarfed by tubes and wires and medical devices. And the last time I saw him outside of the hospital was when he was being carried away in the world's smallest white coffin. This is not how a family, this is not how a parent, this is not how anyone's life should be impacted by something that could have been prevented. This is not how we should learn about how real food safety is. And obviously, this was 30 years ago. And, at the time, I look back at it, and it kind of is a very surreal moment. I mean, his is the only funeral that I've ever been to. I've never been in that horrible of a sick kind of a condition myself. There was a lot of television coverage at the time. I ended up speaking on the phone to President Clinton. He was on Air Force One. He had flown out to Seattle and was going to visit us, and landed just after my son had died. And we had this kind of conversation about this idea of what can we do about this, and it was a very father-to-father conversation. Yeah. And I said, let us help with this. What can we do? And I realized two things. One is, obviously the way I think about things now is different than I thought about things back in 1993. But I've always thought in terms of I'm still in a way in service. I'm not wearing a military uniform, but how can I be of service to my community, to my country, to the world? There's also the sense of there's this very little dash between 1991 and 1993 on his gravestone. What could I do to help build that legacy for my son? But I think the last thing, you start rethinking everything from purpose to mortality to being intelligent, even spiritual, even ideas where you're thinking about what does this mean. And the one thing that I've held very closely over these last 3 decades is I can answer yes to this question of did I lose my son? But I hate the idea of ever thinking that I would answer yes to the idea of my son having lost his father. In a way, what I do is still being a father to my son, and I don't think that I'll ever stop doing that.
Wow, it's an incredible story, and it's an incredible change in life direction, and has given you this mission truly over the last 30 years. Talk to us a little bit about just, so then what? Like, what does the next 30 years look like to you? And, what have you seen that's really been positive in the changes? And where have we seen the biggest improvements? Sure. In, either awareness or prevention, technology, kind of what's transpired since you've been on this mission?
Well, let's clear some things. One is there's no such thing as a time machine, so nothing I can do can go back and change that. And there'll never be an end to foodborne pathogens. There will always be these opportunities, if you will, in food. It's just the nature of things. It's science, right? But we can make a difference in terms of this idea of a food safety culture, and we could strive to try to prevent other parents from living with a chair forever empty at the family table. So, making E. coli a household name, even just seeing how social media has picked up on these. When you see these memes and viral videos and things on social media, I remember thinking at first that it's like someone making fun at someone else's expense. How is that funny? But I also realize, I guess I should say for the audience that I spent the last 3 decades not just working on this, but working in education and earning various college degrees, even my doctorate in law and policy, and looking at this world of food safety through these different lenses has afforded me the opportunity to even look at social media in terms of the idea of here is a unofficial pulse check on how do people really know of and think about food safety. Obviously, when you're surrounded by great people in the food industry and in food safety and other food, food protection, food defense areas, they know about this. But it's hard to get a sense of Joe average consumer. when you start looking at geography and age and so many different aspects of what consumers do and do not understand about this. Right. And the fact that 30 years no one knew what E. coli was, and today people know what E. coli and Salmonella and Listeria, they understand things when we talk about these various outbreaks like romaine lettuce and Chipotle and so many major news items that it's not seen as this foreign idea. People can categorize it and understand that it exists. I also think that even during the pandemic here in the States, when you start looking at distance and hygiene and temperatures and so many elements that are similar to food safety that people were really embracing more in terms of public health. That's also, I think, a good sign of this, this evolution over the last 3 decades.
Yeah, wow, thanks for that.
So I'm curious. I mean, your introduction, Darin. I mean, we've spoken in the past, and I mean, it literally gives me tingles hearing that story again. It's. I can understand why you would be then inspired to dedicate your life to this mission. In the time that you have spent focused in this way, what are you personally most proud of in terms of what you've achieved and what you have seen? You mentioned E. coli becoming a household name. What are some of the things that you're most proud of in this time?
I'm really proud of the support that the food industry gets, whether it's technology, whether it's regulatory policy, whether it is so many NGOs and advocates and people that are really rooting to support these efforts to not only educate, but more importantly, to even inspire, to inspire this work. I mean, ultimately, there's most people know about the jungle. But what most people didn't read is this 1906 London Daily Times literature review of the book as a novel. And the very first paragraph talks about how everything that Upton Sinclair wrote about is true. It ultimately says that the things described by Mr. Sinclair happened yesterday, are happening today and tomorrow, and the next day until some Hercules comes to cleanse the filthy stable. And, here we are in this world where it's hard to miss all the Marvel and DC superhero movies. And we know there's not any one Hercules. But I think it was a very poetic way of saying that all this work requires a Herculean effort, an enormous amount of work, strength, and courage to keep food as safe as it can be, to prevent another chair from becoming empty at the family table. And technology goes a great way to help with the work and the strength that's needed out there. But it is this community, it is this culture, it is the dedication of so many people that support the courage, a very human element that is needed in order to think about the technology, in order to think about asking the right questions and taking the right actions and prioritizing every single day. And to see that really expand over the last 30 years, obviously supported by technology and so many different things and policy, but to really see that Herculean effort be embraced as what is expected and what is more and more commonplace today, that's probably the greatest thing that I can point to that I have seen over the last 3 decades.
Gotcha. Yeah, Darin, you talk a lot about just policy, and it's coordinated policy, it's coordinated regulation, it's people, it's process, it's courage, like you're saying. FSMA has been around now for a while, and it's taken some time to get everything implemented. And there's like even more recent things like Rule 204. Meaning we still have a ways to go. So maybe some for our audience and a lot of the professionals that we work with, the different brands. I mean, FSMA is it's day in the life. It's really guiding a lot of the decisions they've made. So maybe talk a little bit about that policy and where are we at with FSMA? Where are we at with the actual implementation of the intent behind that? And where do you see like maybe we're still falling short? And what do you think's on the horizon as it pertains to FSMA and really fulfilling, the original intent of that, regulation?
This is a great question. I think it's a great topic as well. When you look at the changes made by the USDA immediately after 1993's outbreak, declaring E. coli an illegal adulterant, having required safe handling instructions on meat and poultry, really changing the science. And then you saw this shift over time between outbreaks and recalls tied to foods. There are still tied to food regulated by the FDA, but there's been a growth in the outbreaks and recalls tied to food regulated by the FDA.
Yeah.
So we saw changes in terms of FDA regulations. FSMA was a long time coming. It was not an easy policy to pass. It was actually passed at the same time the American Healthcare, or what was referred to as Obamacare, was passed. And it really came about during this period of time when there was so many, you had leafy greens, you had cucumbers, you had so many FDA-regulated produce outbreaks and illnesses and deaths. And it really started with the produce safety rule, which is one of the rules that made its way into FSMA. But this set of rules that was able to be passed with the Food Safety Modernization Act, it was passed in 2010, signed into law in 2011, but it took another 5 years to get these rules passed, and and the implementation did to be started, and we're still not fully implemented on all these rules. Right. One of the elements of the produce safety rule dealing with water quality and testing was a few years ago was delayed and is still kind of rolling out. And I do need to point out that there are companies out there that are not waiting for some of these due dates, when we're supposed to be starting this. And there are some companies for which FSMA or various elements of FSMA is not everything that they're doing. It's a part of a bigger package of all of the work that they're putting into food safety. But this technology one, when we look at this new era of smarter food safety and we look at Rule 204, looking at the collection and holding on of information for up to 2 years to aid in the transparency and the traceability, especially in the event of an outbreak or recall. That is something that really has been a hard target. I remember a few years ago, 2019. 2019 started off and blockchain was discussed as a 3 to 5 year return on investment. 3 months later, it was a 20 to 25 year return on investment. In these circles are talking about, blockchain as this generic kind of an element. And a lot of it had to do with, getting the right technology, the money for it, all the communication lines. And there were so many companies that are agreeing, yes, we need to do this. Yeah. But they were waiting for these larger companies to come out and quote unquote get it right and do it first. And many companies were literally saying they don't want to be the first to implement, therefore the first to be crucified. Yeah. Looking for these advancements taken by companies. And there were also other company representatives who were saying, well, we're not going to do anything until blockchain comes around, has been proven, and then we'll adopt it. And I've been involved in these conversations where I'll say, look, if you flip the switch on Monday for blockchain, that does not make you better in terms of collecting data or storing data, securing the data, communicating, accessing, analyzing the data. There are so many elements that need to be developed. Who do you hire? What is their job? What's their responsibility? Who's going to do this work? How are we going to organize this? And how are we going to build this into our mission statement? There's so much work that needs to go into create a strong foundation for this technology to work. What's exciting is how many companies they might not be buying blockchain tomorrow, but they've been progressing very strongly in all these different areas around communication, around storage, around analysis, around, asking the right questions and testing their protocols, and even focusing on elements like, for instance, corporate social responsibility and ESG. These are things that are really driving this focus on what's being included today as a description of these more progressive companies in this arena.
Yeah, no, it's a great point about the whole ESG and CSR. I think, in addition to just the government regulation of what's coming, what's your opinion? It feels to me like much of this is also being driven by consumer demand. People want to know, who am I, where are those ingredients coming from? Who am I buying food from? It's obviously safety is a primary concern, but people are more and more now wanting to understand, is this good for the environment? Am I buying palm oil and it's destroying the rainforest? Where is this coming from? So talk to us a little bit about just, it sounds like from an academic standpoint that you also are focused in that area. And I feel like it's two bookends between kind of what consumers want and what consumers are demanding and what regulation is driving. And then there's a lot of opportunity in the middle for people that either corporate do the right thing because it's good for their brand, or there's a lot of opportunity with technology companies to bring solutions. So it feels like there's more and more groundswell around, making this happen for real and getting over that final hurdle, which it is taking a Herculean effort to get all things aligned to accomplish the goal of FSMA.
Well, one thing I've observed over the last 3 decades is, and not too many people talk about this, the idea of stakeholders has radically changed.
Yeah.
Stakeholders 30 years ago were stock owners.
Yes.
Today, consumers are by and large considered to be an impressive impact, an impressive force in terms of being stakeholders. And a lot of this has to do with social media. We know a lot more information today. We are aware of companies. It's not just food safety. I mean, we have people that are making demands in terms of the environmental footprint, the carbon footprint, their stance on this political issue or that political issue, who they donate to. Mm-hmm. Is this company still operating in areas of conflict? Who do they back, that kind of a thing. And a lot of this has nothing to do with food safety.
Yeah.
But I think this idea of, look, whether it's an economic situation where the cost of living and the cost of food and the idea of if it's going to cost a lot more, we need to look at it in terms of the money we spend on our food should be considered equal to the idea of how we can vote with our dollars. Yes. And if we can make a decision to go with one company or the next, maybe that decision is not based solely on the color of the packaging or the mascot they use, but on their political element, on their investment into food safety, on their transparency in terms of their certifications and their validation efforts. And even if a company has an error, an issue, an incident with food, how do they respond to it? Do they blame others, take forever to solve the issue, and don't actually accept ownership and responsibility for what they did? Or do they come out open and right up front and say, here's this problem, we're doing this to solve this, here's what we're doing, we're now going to invest in this, we're not going to do this, and we don't want to have this problem happen again. And literally even go beyond their kind of corporate walls, and they become that significant voice and even impact on other companies within that industry. And I actually saw that with Jack in the Box. Yeah. I mean, I could easily say, look, I'll never forgive or forget in terms of Jack in the Box. But as an academic who studies this, I also can't be ignorant to the fact that Jack in the Box invested a lot of money into science and technology and really kind of setting the standard for other companies to grow with in terms of, again, not having this be a repeated incident within their company. So there's a lot out there that has changed in terms of the role of the consumer, their expectations. It's no longer the idea of a dream or some future idea, some future technology that on the horizon. These are things that consumers expect and demand today.
Yeah, no, great point. Obviously CMX is a technology company, and so we've talked about consumers, we've talked about regulation. Talk to us a little bit about just the role of technology and what you've seen over the last 30 years. You talked a lot about just data storage and record keeping and transparency. Give us kind of your perspective from supply chain down to maybe the endpoint retail establishment. What role has technology played,
Sure.
and how has that made improvements, in your opinion, for food safety?
You know, in a way, there's been two polar opposite kind of impacts that technology has. On one hand, like I was saying, consumers know a lot more. We have more access to. We can buy things online. We can order things on an app and either pick it up or have it delivered. We can have third-party shoppers. We can have so many third and fourth parties involved because of what we have access to on our apps. We can buy directly from a farm. We can buy directly from a company in another country. We can have things at our doorstep within 24 hours or 24 minutes. And
Yes.
we can play a role in terms of how people understand when there's an outbreak, or where we can crowdsource data about our experiences at a restaurant. And that is an impressive element, that we've gone from being passive to being more active and generative users of technology in this aspect. On the other hand, though, let's look at the industry. Those who are being proactive and using technology, they have not only more transparency, more speed, more access to data. It's not just that paper may be in the box over there in the corner, collecting dust. This is information that companies are getting from their suppliers and giving to their distributors. Ways that companies are allowing third-party auditors to come in and verify and validate what they're doing. We're also talking about speed, the speed at which we can have access to audit reports or to testing samples, or map out where tests were taken within our plant, or track the testing and the maintenance and the hygiene controls and the sanitation efforts, and even track our employees and their health. The speed at which we can find information and take action is incredible, because here's the deal. The longer that it takes for these things, two things happen. Our options decrease and our liabilities increase. So any time that we can use technology at our benefit to isolate, to control, to bring an end to resolve, and even perhaps proactively to prevent an issue, right?
Yeah.
We, again, can be maximizing our options while minimizing, if not completely preventing, any liabilities. And in terms of liabilities, there's far too much focus on economic recovery, economic liabilities, but for those families who they may have a child who recovers, but will live with lifelong medical complications. And of course, there's some 3,000 families every year in America who lose family members, mostly children, mostly vulnerable populations, very young, very elderly, to, in many cases, foodborne illnesses that could have been prevented. These numbers haven't really changed. I think that is becoming more complicated, but what I am seeing as a positive element is, again, this proactive element within industry, the way technology is being used to affect social impact, to impact consumer health, to prevent harm to consumers, not solely technology being used to maximize profits. Because here's the deal. The cost of failure versus the cost of preventing failure, or the cost of compliance versus the cost of failure, it costs almost 17 times more, if not greater, to fail, to be out of compliance, than it does to do everything we can to stay within our safety ranges, within every kind of safety protocol, and to make food as safe as we can. So food safety may cost money, but trust me, failures in food safety cost consumers and industry as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like, I think of as an industry, as a profession, a lot of the people in our audience, a lot of the people we work with are obviously food safety scientists that are at these brands. Like, what are some things that you think that they can do to bring a more human element to what they do? I think there is an overemphasis on speed or cost savings or market cap for some of these public companies, but in real world terms, the food safety scientist that doesn't have the budget or the staff, and they're responsible for food safety at one of these manufacturers or restaurant chains or what have you, what are some practical things that you think they can do to bring more awareness to the importance of what they do, not only from a human standpoint, but an economic impact, as you say?
I think 3 quick things. Well, I'll quickly talk about 3 things. Excuse me. I wish they were quick. Nothing is that easy. But quickly speaking, the first thing is the idea of prioritization, whether it is mission statement, whether it is shifting when you look at cost-benefit analysis, return on investment. What are those priorities? How do we prioritize that? We've seen companies that prioritize only after their name has been in the news for the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. Imagine if those companies put that same amount of effort and urgency and prioritization all the time into food safety. Maybe they could have prevented themselves from becoming a nightly news headline or whatever because of those reasons.
Yeah.
Second is investing. Again, we see news of companies that now we're going to invest in this, now we're going to invest in this because of this outbreak, right? Well, we need to make sure we're always investing into food safety. And even if economically, well, we haven't had an outbreak for a while, so we're going to spend less on this, or I don't know if we need this technology, or I don't know if we need to store this information because we've never had to do this. Says everyone who is starting to become more complacent about the idea of that prioritization that I mentioned earlier. We need to make sure that we're always investing in food safety. This is an investment in your brand. This is an investment in your the very people who you depend upon for your consumer base. This is an investment into your employees who don't want to be dragged through the news because of what their company does or does not do. They don't want to lose their jobs, right? Continuously investing in food safety. Obviously, it's different for one company than it is for the next, but it has to be something that is right up there next to that prioritization. And then finally, I talk about this in terms of training, but in reality, we need to make sure that training is thought of differently. It's not just about training food safety to the quality assurance or the food safety or those few that work in those areas. We need to train everyone from security guards at the gate to warehouse to hygiene to sanitation to maintenance and engineering to literally everyone within that company has a role in terms of food safety. And we need to make sure that there's this balance between the level of training you have for those who are specifically involved in food safety and quality assurance, and that there's a level of food safety that's there for everyone. Because everyone can be eyes and ears and can take some action in terms of food safety. But the other side of that is, it's not just procedural and equipment and a legal speak. There has to be this element of the true burden of disease, understanding the names and the faces and the stories and the lives impacted behind the data, behind those numbers that we see from the CDC, from the government, from independent auditors. The idea of understanding this is what it looks like when someone is impacted like this. This is what someone goes through in this situation. This is something that our employees literally can be going through, because it's not like the players on the court versus the fans in the audience. Everyone who works from the bottom to the top of that totem pole within the food industry is also a consumer and has families at home that can easily be the next victim as well. So really personalizing and making sure we understand that true burden of disease is an incredibly vital part of that overall training. So again, the mission and prioritization, the investment and the training, that all goes along with technology. Again, technology is critical for that work and strength. Yeah. But the things I talked about are also going to help that courage that is needed for the Herculean effort that we need in food safety.
And all 3 of those are needed if we're really going to have a culture of food safety like you talked about in the beginning. So, thank you for that. Really, really appreciate that. Jeremy, you want to...
Well, I mean, I think just bringing a loop back to where we started, opening with your story, Darin, and just bringing that human element into it, I think is so important, because we do talk about technology, we talk about efficiencies, but I think just, as you say, bringing that human element back to it really I mean, that's the most important piece. I mean, that's what it's all about. It's all about ultimately protecting lives, saving lives. Everything else hangs off the back of that, and that's really where I think having your story and the way that you've been able to tell it over the years is, it's amazing, and it's
powerful.
It really is. Yeah. So I'm curious. I mean, for you personally, given everything you've done to date, what's in the future? What are you excited about as you look to the future for you?
It's strange to think about the future. I mean, I didn't think about 30 years. I didn't think about 2022. 30 years ago. I think about the future in terms of, there's going to be more disruption, new products in industry, new products on the shelves. There'll be new technologies, and there'll be, unfortunately, new examples to look at in terms of that true burden of disease. But I think what I look forward to is that we're not starting from the first step in terms of understanding the why behind what we're doing. Yeah. We have this next generation of food safety experts, of quality assurance, of food safety and quality assurance leaders that are coming into this, and they've been exposed to this, whether it's social media or great education programs that really are increasing their focus on telling the why behind this. And I think that as we look at the diversity, I mean, we have people in food safety that are acting as coaches and advocates and consultants and journalists and wearing so many hats that really support this diverse playing field, if you will, in terms of all that goes into food safety. I wish I could shout out to all of them. I know I should probably give a shout out to Rochelle Keats.
Rochelle, yes.
Rochelle. Should be very excited.
And all the many, the many people who literally are an inspiration and are noted for their tireless contribution to food safety, even though, like I said before, there'll never be an end to this. Yeah. We need to make sure that our next generation understands the past and is as well prepared as they can be for that Herculean effort ahead for them.
Yeah. That's really good. We call them the hidden heroes of quality and safety, and that's really, who we're trying to, really lift and highlight as a profession, certainly with this podcast and certainly with what we do from a software standpoint, really enabling the people that are behind the scenes that are carrying a tremendous amount of responsibility and they need help, and technology certainly is one aspect of providing that help. But I really appreciate you sharing your ideas around education and investment and just having alignment with the corporate and understanding the impact of the consumer on those decisions. So really, really appreciate your time today, Darin. And, I appreciate you giving a personal shout out to Rochelle. Rochelle is on our team and considers you a personal hero of hers. And so really thank you for being here. And I really think our audience is going to enjoy this talk. And so really, again, appreciate your time. And thank you, Jeremy, for joining me today. And thanks so much to our listeners. And until next time, we will say have a great day. Thanks, Darin.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this podcast episode of In the Loop with CMX. If you like what we're doing, then please do leave us a review and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube or podcast channels. That way you'll be notified automatically about each new episode as we produce them. You can also be part of our podcast as a guest. Get in touch through our website where you can also learn more about us, our clients, and the CMX One EQMS platform. Just go to www.cmx1.com. Thanks again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next time.